Josephine Baker, you can try and stop her, but she doesn't need her gowns. She will find gowns. Welcome to Electric Enthusiasm, the podcast where we celebrate unironic enthusiasm. I'm a high potassium treat, Katie Cobalt.
And I'm Alexander Kjolf, a man who's not afraid to admit that my favorite cocktails are the big tropical ones with little fruit and umbrellas in them.
I was gonna say, where's the tiny umbrella? Does it have a tiny umbrella?
It must have a tiny umbrella.
So how does this podcast work, Alex?
It's simple. In each episode, one of us will prepare a topic that they are super enthusiastic about and will do their level best to infect the other host and you, the audience, with their enthusiasm on this topic. We also have a special guest who is super excited about something that we know nearly nothing about.
And then we also have our moment of meta, where we get enthusiastic about enthusiasm and talk a little about why enthusiasm matters and how to live a more enthusiastic life.
And we want to hear about your enthusiasms. Visit our website, electricenthusiasm.com, or our Instagram @electricenthusiasm, and tell us what you're enthusiastic about these days. Or you could even plain old send us an email at hello@electricenthusiasm.com.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about the most interesting woman in the world, Josephine Baker. Alex, What do you know about her?
So my knowledge of Josephine Baker begins and ends with banana skirt. I must have seen a picture of her once, topless in a banana skirt with sort of an impish look in her face. And that's all I know. I know she existed and she at one point must have worn a banana skirt. Did I get that right?
You are correct. She did in fact wear a banana skirt. And like the impish look on her face, that's very on brand for Miss Baker. Oh, hang on. I should specify. There are going to be a lot of French pronunciations in this episode, and I will do my level best to pronounce things correctly. I did study French in school, but that was many moons ago, and I'm going to try, and if there's anyone listening who is French, I deeply apologize. I'm so sorry. Let's do the facts first. Frida Josephine McDonald was born in St. Louis, Missouri on the 3rd of July, 1906, and passed on the 12th of April, 1975 in Paris, France. So she was born in America, but she became a naturalized French citizen later in life. She is a dancer, a singer, an all-round entertainer, movie star, celebrity. But did you know she was a French resistance agent and a civil rights activist?
No way.
Yes! So the things that I love about Josephine Baker is, one, she's an amazingly talented person. But then she used her power and her talent for really epically good forces. And we're going to get into that, I promise.
Wow. Unlike a lot of celebrities who disappear up their own ass, she actually, cared about the world and wanted to make it better.
I would argue some of the ways in which she went about it was a bit up her own ass, but good intentions.
Excellent. I do have one question, though. Two questions, actually. If she had been famous today, would the banana skirt thing have flown? Or would she have ended up like Janet Jackson with her wardrobe malfunction?
I have so many feelings about Janet Jackson, the wardrobe malfunction. There's a fantastic podcast called You're Wrong About, which is one of my favorite in the world. And they have an episode about Janet Jackson in which they talk about why did Janet Jackson get so much crap for that when it was Justin Timberlake who pulled off her bra.
Uh-huh.
Why did the white guy get away with it and the black woman get so much flack? Josephine's early career, she was really racy. She would perform topless. She was almost like a burlesque act. I think a lot of that was highly contextual at the time. As a black performer working in France, there was a sense of she had to be exoticized and fetishized a little bit in order for her act to sell.
That makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. Second question. If she had been famous today, what would her celebrity nickname have been? I mean, Jennifer Lopez is J-Lo. Scarlett Johansson is ScarJo. So would she have been, Joe-Bay, J-Bake?
She had a lot of nicknames.
Ooh.
Let me just quickly pull it up.
Moment of Google.
Our moment of Google. So she had many nicknames at the time. Black Venus, the Black Pearl, Bronze Venus, Creole Goddess. She had so many nicknames at the time.
Interesting. Yeah, Creole Goddess has got to be my favorite of those. What's your favorite?
I think Black Venus, because I think Venus is like the goddess of love. And I think that really encompasses a lot of the aspects of her life.
Excellent. Tell me all about Josephine Baker.
Well, when telling you the story of Miss Baker, I want to start with her roots, where she came from. Josephine's childhood was not a happy one. She was the oldest child of a poor black family, and she was put to work at the age of 7. She worked as a domestic for white families living in with the family and suffered sexual abuse from her employers multiple times. If that wasn't tragic enough, you're 11 years old. It's July 2nd, 1917. Josephine Baker remembers her being shaken awake by her mother, screaming at her to run. It's the whites, hurry. The next morning, the newspaper headlines will scream, race rioters fire East St. Louis and shoot and hang many Negroes. Dead estimated from 20 to 76. She remembers hiding under a bridge, watching the sky hazy with the smoke and glowing from the fires. At 11, she had 2 marriages before she was 15, hoping to escape life on the streets or to find a better future for herself. It wasn't until November 1920 when the 14-year-old Baker's fortunes changed, when she was hired as a chorus girl for a black vaudeville touring company.
So that's horrific, having that experience as a child. I think what's even more horrific is that I had never heard about that happening in St. Louis. I had never heard about the Tulsa race riot until it came up in the Watchmen TV series, and until it's been sort of memorialized now on its 100th anniversary. The fact that these things could go on and then could get completely buried in history, it's horrific. It's terrible.
Yeah. Many of these race riots get completely swept under the rug. It's important to remember that these things happened and that they had real effect on the people that experienced them. As I mentioned before, Josephine Baker actually ended up moving to France and becoming a naturalized citizen. And she would go on to face criticism for leaving America and would be seen as an outsider to American communities later in life. But I think it's really important to remember the traumas she had to face just to survive her childhood in America at the time. This was her response to that amount of trauma that she had before she was 14. I think it's totally reasonable for her to want to escape and run away from America.
Yeah. I could get behind that.
Yeah. Now that we have the context to give you an idea of the amazing resilience that Josephine Baker represents as a Black artist, let's talk about the banana skirt that you know her for.
Yes.
So it was 1927 when she had her breakout performance in the review En Vente de Folle at the Folle Bergère in Paris, wearing a short skirt made of artificial bananas and a beaded necklace. She would often perform topless or would carefully place beads and frills, partly because this was expected of her as a Black dancer at the time, but that image of her has become part of our cultural zeitgeist as an icon of the jazz age and the roaring 20s. One of the reasons I am completely obsessed with Josephine Baker is her ability to be comedic as a dancer. We love a woman who can be funny as well as being massively talented. In her early career, she was cast as the pony of the chorus line. The pony is the last girl in the lineup who would often play the fool as if they forgot the choreography, would have very expressive facial expressions. They would dance cross-eyed, for example, or pulling funny faces. And then they would return on stage after the chorus line was over for a solo encore, doing the routine again with far more complexity, completely flawlessly.
And that's actually something you see in a lot of acts. For instance, Cirque du Soleil in a lot of their shows will have one performer who's just as good as everybody else, but does the same things comedically to play for laughs. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. That's the pony.
The pony. I love it.
The pony.
Beyond the stage, she was also the first Black woman to star in a major motion picture. The silent film Siren of the Tropics in 1927. And after her success there, she went on to star in talkies like Zuzu in 1934 and Princess Tam Tam in 1935.
I'm curious. So the whole topless thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is Paris in the 20s. Probably no big deal back then for Parisian society. Do we know anything about how she felt about it? Was this something she was pressured into? Was this something she enjoyed? Was this natural? How did she view it? Do we know anything about that?
I don't have anything on how she personally felt about it. She was very glamorous all throughout her life. And so she was always at the height of fashion. She was always wearing the best outfits. I think she probably would have preferred to wear a more fashionable gown because she loves big, extravagant gowns. Like later in life, when she was very successful in her own right, she would wear these massive feathered headdresses, and she often would have multiple cars of Dior gowns following her between venues. So
that's amazing.
Like she was a fashionista. She has very campy, almost drag queen aesthetic, where her outfits were absolutely larger than life. So she's always been one for glamour and always been one for wearing fabulous outfits. And I think she probably really enjoyed that she was an iconic dresser, and the banana skirt became such a statement piece of her life. But I think also, she loves a gown. She loves big outfits, big dresses.
That is awesome.
So she's a fashionista, she's a dancer, she's a movie star, she's also a singer. Like I said, there is nothing this woman cannot do. Her most famous hit, J'adore, was recorded in 1939, and it was based off this idea where she proclaimed, "I have two loves, my country and Paris." It not only became her signature song, but captured the divided loyalties of the lost generation, particularly since Baker became a muse for American immigrant writers like Langston Hughes, Ernest Hemingway, and F. Scott Fitzgerald. And she was one of these characters that helped create this community and this collaboration of cultures between American and France. And so this song was kind of representative of that cross-communication and that cultural experience.
J'ai deux amours, mon pays Paris, parle toujours, mon cœur est ravi, ma savane est belle, mais à quoi bon le nier, ce qui m'ensorcelle, c'est Paris, Paris tout entier.
Wow. I gotta say, when I hear that, she has an amazing voice, and it sounds very classical rather than jazzy or bluesy. I was expecting something like maybe Billie Holiday, who had, amazing expression, but honestly wasn't much of a singer. Mm-mm. She was a fantastic singer.
She's a phenomenal singer. That's one of the many songs that she sang. I figured I had to play you the most famous one. Now let's talk about her work as a spy, because this is just really freaking cool.
But first, this episode of Electric Enthusiasm is sponsored by Heart Count. Are people in your workplace enthusiastic about their jobs? Or are all of your best coworkers hoping to quit as soon as they get the chance? Companies and teams that use Heart Count don't have to guess. With a simple, weekly, scientifically proven 20-second survey, you get exact data on what employees feel and think about their jobs, so you can build a happier and more successful workplace. Visit heartcount.com to try it in your organization free of charge. That's heart as in the muscle, not hard as in difficult, because in the best workplaces, every heart counts.
I want to take you back. It's September 1939. You're living in Paris. France has just declared war on Germany. She's still very prominent and a highly sought-after performer. The WWII, the French military intelligence agency, saw how valuable Baker could be and recruited her as an honorable correspondent. If you are a celebrity during war times, you are a very useful person to collect information. Her celebrity and charm allowed her to access embassies, ministries, military soirees, and she would rub shoulders with everyone from high-ranking Japanese official to Italian bureaucrats to high-level German officers, all the while collecting information and smuggling it out. She would write notes with invisible ink onto her sheet music, or she would pin notes into her underwear, relying on her celebrity status to avoid being strip searched. And because she was still this prominent celebrity, she could go on tour to neutral countries in Latin America or even closer to home in Portugal, where she could hand off said information to the French resistance or the British. After the war, Baker received the Croix de la Croix and the Rosette de la Résistance, and she made the Chevalier de Légion d'Honneur by Charles de Gaulle himself. She was an incredibly decorated war spy resistance member, as if being one of the most iconic performers of the jazz age was not enough. Josephine Baker used her privilege and power to be a freaking spy. So cool.
That is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. And I could imagine that, because she's in show business and because she's Black, some people might underestimate her and maybe talk freely around her, and they might tell her things they shouldn't have. Cool. I'll just mention that since we did do an episode on Harpo Marx, he was also a spy. Yes, he was the first American performer of any kind to perform in the Soviet Union. This is after World War II, during the Cold War. He tours the USSR. He's a huge hit. And as he's traveling home, he gets a visit from some people from the embassy saying, could you take these papers back to the US, but nobody can know you have them. So he tapes the documents to his ankle, and he travels all the way home. This takes weeks at the time, all the way home in a near state of panic that somebody will, yeah. Then when his boat comes into New York, somebody meets him, he hands off the paper, and he can scratch his ankle for the first time in 2 weeks.
That would be absolutely terrifying. I would be so self-conscious of my body.
Imagine being approached, you're a huge star, you're approached for this, and you say yes.
Yeah.
That's damn heroic.
Speaking of being damn heroic, despite being based in France in the 1950s, Josephine Baker was also involved in the civil rights movement in the US.
Yes.
So whenever she came back to the US from France, she refused to perform for segregated audiences. And because she was such a huge star at the time, she forced venues to integrate. The Miami Club offered her $10,000 to perform, and she was like, integrate. And they were like, no. And she was like, bye. And they were like, okay, we'll integrate. She also received a lifetime membership from the NAACP and was part of a campaign to save Willie McGee, who was a Black man on death row because he raped a white woman in 1945 on the basis of dubious evidence. However, there was a lot of controversy around her involvement in the civil rights movement. She was questioned for being an outsider. And also people were a little bit concerned that her racy reputation from her earlier years would hurt the cause. And this is very in line from my understanding of the civil rights movement. They were very concerned about having a squeaky clean image. They didn't want to have anything that could possibly tarnish the reputation of the movement. If you think about the instance of Rosa Parks, like there was actually another pregnant young woman at the time who refused to switch seats on the bus, but they couldn't use her as a poster child because she was a young teenage pregnant woman.
Pregnant outside of wedlock or something, yeah. I think that schism in the civil rights movement has continued for a long time. Some people wanted to be very respectable. It continued up to the Vietnam peace movement. In the amazing movie, The Trial of the Chicago 7, you see it. A group of peace protesters are accused of trying to incite a riot in Chicago during the Democratic National Convention. And there's a schism between the people who are being prosecuted, because some of them want to be squeaky clean and respectable, and some of them want to be provocateurs. There was a guy called Abby Hoffman who actually one day during the trial shows up in a judge's robe. Let me tell you, the judge did not appreciate that. So he's like, take off the judge's robe. He does. Beneath that, he's wearing a policeman's uniform. I think in every kind of movement, there are people who think, let's wear suits and be respectable and be taken seriously. And there's another wing saying, let's go crazy. Let's provoke attention. Yeah. You see that in a lot of places and a lot of movements.
Like, I totally understand this desire to be seen as respectable, because you're asking to be seen as equal. You're asking to be seen as a person, to have the same access as everyone else. If we can convince them, the oppressors, that we are respectable, that we are equal, then they'll have to agree with us. They have to see us. But at the same time, it's because of the white supremacy and the oppression that meant that she had a quote-unquote racy reputation. So despite all of this, in 1963, she was invited to speak at the March on Washington at the side of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Baker was the only official female speaker at the march, and she wore her Free French uniform emblazoned with her Medal of Légion d'Honneur.
And now, to show the international character of the struggle in which we are currently engaged, I would like to introduce to you a person who, though far in residence from our shores, has come all the way from her home to be with us today, Miss Josephine Baker.
I want you to know that this is the happiest day of my entire life.
I will link the full speech in the show notes, but I would like to read you two quotes, one from like the middle and one from the end. You know, friends, that I do not lie to you when I tell you I have walked into the palaces of kings and queens, and into the houses of presidents, and much more. But I could not walk into a hotel in America and get a cup of coffee. And that made me mad. And when I get mad, you know that I open my big mouth. And then look out. Because when Josephine opens her mouth, they hear it all over the world.
Wow.
Okay.
And just that juxtaposition, I walked into royal palaces and I can't get a cup of coffee in the South.
The way she spoke was so simple and so clear, but also speaks to the fact that one of the reasons they invited her to speak was to give this idea of international recognition. When Josephine opens her mouth, they hear it all over the world. Final quote. This is from later on in the speech, towards the end. I am not a young woman now, friends. My life is behind me. There is not too much fire burning inside me, and before it goes out, I want to use what's left of it to light a fire in you, so that you can carry on, and so that you can do those things that I have done. Then, when my fires have burned out, and I will go where we all go someday, I can be happy.
Wow. That is such a beautiful sentiment. Using the little fire that's left in you to light the fire in others. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful image.
She seems to see and understand, towards the end of my life, I'm not long for this world, but what I can do is I can inspire the next generation. When she's in the middle of war, I'm a woman of power, I'm in a position of privilege, people don't see me as someone who's threatening, therefore they'll speak, I can use that power. She understands where she is in the world that she's in.
And the whole, I don't give a shit. There is nothing you can do to me. You can't kill my career. You can't kill me. I can say whatever the hell I want. And I'll go on this stage and tell you the truth. I think that's amazing. Here's a challenging question, though. Do we know if she hung out with James Baldwin, the writer?
I have not heard. So she has a couple of known associates, like Picasso was a friend of hers, Frida Kahlo was a friend of hers, Langston Hughes, Ernest Hemingway, but I never read about her and James Baldwin together.
Okay, we'll have to Google that later.
I'm going to tell you about her rainbow tribe now, which this is controversial. I don't know how I feel about this. I think it's interesting, and I think it's a very important aspect of her mindset, but I would love to hear, like, do you like this? Do you hate this? Do you think it's complicated? So, Josephine Baker and her rainbow tribe. It was during this time that she began adopting children, forming a family she referred to as the Rainbow Tribe. In the spring of 1953, while in Japan on tour, she wrote to Miki Sawada, who ran an orphanage. I would like you to find me a Japanese boy of pure race, a healthy one, 2 years old. I want to adopt 5 little 2-year-old boys, Japanese, Black from South Africa, an Indian from Peru, a Nordic child, and an Israelite. They will live together like brothers. Josephine wanted to prove that children of different ethnicities and religions could still be brothers, and often took her children with her on her cross-country tours. And when they were home in Les Milandes, tours were arranged so visitors could walk around the grounds to see how natural and happy the children were, and for an extra fee you could see the children bathing, or playing in the yard, or whatever. When she brought her Japanese and Korean son home from Japan, she had them wearing kimono and authentic national garb because she thought it was really important for these children to have a sense of national identity when they were raised in France. She used these adoptions almost as weapons for her racial fight. At the beginning, when she had all of her children at home, she would put up billboards along the roads saying, "Come see Les Milandes and its Rainbow Tribe." So Baker, with her 4th husband, Joe Bouillon, who, incidentally, was gay. They raised 2 daughters, French-born Marianne, Moroccan-born Stelina, and 10 sons. Korean-born
What?
Jeannot, Japanese-born Akio, Colombian-born Luis, Finnish-born Yari, French-born Jean-Claude Noël Amoise, Algerian-born Brahim, Ivorian-born Kofi, and Venezuelan-born Mara. They had 12 children. 12.
That's a football team and a backup player. I like it.
Her motivations behind her rainbow tribe were this idea of showing that it doesn't matter where you're from, you can be brothers, you can be sisters, you can come together. However, she also, sold tickets so people could see that, and would also have them featured in advertisements saying like the Rainbow Tribe likes this particular type of soft drink. I think I can't tell if I hate this or I love this.
For me, it would all depend on one thing, which is how did those kids end up doing later on? Because you could do all of those things as a sort of an intersection between performance and social justice, and completely mess up these kids' lives. Or you could do it in the same way, but also, do it with love and attention and care and love these kids. It would all depend on, did it mess them up completely and they're now all in therapy for the rest of their lives? Or did they actually grow up feeling loved and cared for? Do we know?
After Martin Luther King passed, his wife approached Josephine Baker and asked her if she would take over the leadership of the civil rights movement. And after careful consideration, she actually turned it down because she wanted to be there for her children. And she felt like doing that would take her away from them for too long.
Wow. So she probably did care for the kids. I think that shows it. Yeah. That's amazing.
One of the main sources that I use for this particular research project actually comes from Jean-Claude Baker. One of her sons actually spent a ridiculous amount of time studying everything he could about his mother and writing a book called Josephine, the Hungry Heart. And it's considered to be one of the foremost books of research on Josephine Baker. And I think this at least shows Jean-Claude, at least, loved his mother and wanted to share her story and share her life with the world. And he was one of the very few people who managed to find out a little bit more about her birth father through going through hospital records. Like, she had a Black mother who got to stay at a very nice private hospital for 6 weeks, which is very unusual for the time. This is 1906. Most Black women gave birth at home. So Jean-Claude speculates that his grandfather is actually the German family that Josephine's mother worked for.
Right. Given that there probably was real love towards these children, I think it's problematic. It's complicated.
Yeah.
But I would also say that it's probably not terribly different from some of the reality TV these days, right? Where you have big families featured and you see the kids and they're definitely exposed way worse and also used in ads and promotions and that kind of thing. We could scoff, we could look back and say, that's the 1950s. We're no better today. There are kids being equally exploited.
It was really subversive to do this at the time. The American military were not, this is in speed round. I got 3 fun facts in speed round. We're jumping to that now because she was performing in Japan, and the American FBI diverted her luggage to Hong Kong because they didn't want her to perform, and they didn't want her to spread her ideals about equality and justice, because no matter where she was performing, she would talk about racial integration as part of her act. And so the Americans who were like, this is a very famous woman who's touring around the world, we don't want her to give America a bad reputation, they diverted her luggage, thinking that if she doesn't have her gowns, she won't perform. But she just got some local kimono and performed in kimono. Fun fact, Josephine Baker, you can try and stop her, but she doesn't need her gowns. She will find gowns.
Yes, that is amazing. And also, there must have been a meeting at the American intelligence agency somewhere saying, how do we stop her? I know, let's take away her gowns.
Yeah.
That'll teach her.
So the other 2 fun facts I have for you about Josephine Baker that I couldn't fit into anywhere else, but I really like them. In her later shows in Paris, she was often accompanied on stage by her pet cheetah called Chiquita, who wore a diamond-studded collar, who would sometimes escape from its leash into the orchestra pit where it terrorized the musicians. No. It gets worse, Alex. It gets worse. Audiences would hope for that. That was considered another exciting element of the show, is watching the cheetah terrorize people.
Do we know how many musicians the cheetah ended up eating over the course of its career? Or...
I do not know, but I don't think he actually killed anybody. I think he just attacked people and or played with the instruments.
That is beyond amazing.
Yeah.
And you got to wonder if somewhere in the band's contract there was like a damage waiver. In case of attack by cheetah, you can't sue Ms. Josephine Baker.
Final fun fact about Ms. Josephine Baker. She was very quietly, but very much bisexual. She had 4 marriages over the course of her life. The first 2 were when she was under the age of 15, so I don't know if they count. But she had 4 marriages in total.
Wait. 2 marriages before the age of 15.
So she was married at 13, which luckily she didn't need to get divorced because child marriages are illegal. And so she just left her husband after a year. Then she married again at 14, and then she left her husband when she got an option to go on vaudeville on tour. And then she married 2 more times, and then the last marriage to Joe Bouillon, who I mentioned earlier, he was quietly gay. I like to think that their marriage is more, as some people would call it, like a beard. It was more like just a, I've married a man, I've married a woman, see, look, we're heteronormative, yay. But she was very careful to keep her affairs with women out of the public eye. She did not want it to be known. She was very quiet about it. And unfortunately, this means that everything we know about this is all based on hearsay. And like her colleagues would say like, oh, they were lady lovers, or they were very good friends, or they were gal pals. It's really hard to say if any of these are for sure true. I think the one that we have the most evidence for is that she was linked to the blues legend Clara Smith. When she talks about her early days in Paris, she also talks about Ada Bricktop Smith. She's also linked to the French novelist Colette. And possibly, this one's the most like, we don't know, but it could have happened, maybe, maybe not, Frida Kahlo.
I was just thinking.
Yeah. So she had a lot of entanglements with various women, and she only ever married men. But it is very, like, with all historical figures, it's sort of like, they were really good friends, kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of thing.
And it's a little sad that she could be so open about civil rights, about racial integration, but this was apparently her limit. She felt that there was no room in society for her to be open about this. It's only in the last few decades that's become acceptable. That's something you can say as a performer. I am bisexual, I am gay, I am whatever. Yeah.
In Jean-Claude's book, he talks about this idea where she was not comfortable with talking about LGBT rights in public, and she would never mention it, and she wouldn't bring it up. It was always very behind closed doors. It was always very quiet. It was never something that she would fight for. So even though she was around in the Stonewall era, where people were very actively fighting for gay liberation, she was very much not a part of that movement. Okay.
Wow.
So I'm curious, what was the most exciting thing about Josephine Baker that you learned today?
I mean, from a purely factual standpoint, it's a spy thing. I mean, how awesome is that? That is just too cool of her to take on that role and play it so well. I thought it was beautiful. But I think more than anything else, what really makes me enthusiastic about her is that whole I'm gonna live my life my way kind of thing. I'm gonna go out and be different. I'm gonna stand up for what I believe in. I'm gonna take a part in society. I'm not gonna be afraid to speak out, and I'm going to speak out with eloquence and deep thought. I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah.
I can admire that in a person, that willingness to be yourself, to not worry too much about what others think of you, and that willingness to actually stand up and make a difference in the world instead of just enjoying the privilege that you got later in life, especially considering where she came from, right? I thought that's amazing. I had no idea there was so much going on with J-Bake. Or did we settle on Joe-Bay?
Joe-Bay. She is honestly, I think, the most interesting woman in the world. The fact that she had such a diverse and rich career, we can see her as really complicated, If you look into her life and you look into her actions and what she's done, wow, that Rainbow Tribe thing, I don't know how I feel about that. Like, she's a real person because we have so much information about her, and she's complex and difficult and interesting. And I absolutely love that about her.
And I think you can love people like that even though they're not perfect. I think you can love them in large part because they're not perfect. And I think just the very fact that she lived her life the way she did expands the possibilities for the rest of us. It paves the way. It shows us what's possible. We don't need to go there. I personally am not planning to adopt 12 kids of different races.
So you're saying I can't get that cheetah that I've always wanted?
What are the cheetah regulations like in Hong Kong right now, Katie? What would it take to keep a cheetah in a
in an apartment in Hong Kong?
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look into that for you.
You'll have to check out. But just knowing that people could live that large, could live that big, could live that flamboyantly, I think that's amazing. And it holds a space for the rest of us to maybe think a little bigger, to not limit ourselves as much.
Yeah.
And I love people like that who display it so clearly. Those people are amazing, and they don't need to be perfect to be amazing. I think that's super important.
Mm-hmm. Definitely not.
So, Katie, where should a person go to learn more about Josephine Baker?
I'm assuming we have show notes. But yes, I have a bunch of sources with links to free books and articles that you can check out. But I highly recommend the book written by her son, Jean-Claude Baker, from 1993, Josephine, The Hungry Heart. I have a link from the archive.org book, so you can actually read it for free. Archive.org is an online library. Once you've made an account, you can read it for free.
And you can, of course, find the show notes on our website at electricenthusiasm.com.
There we go.
That was amazing. That was so cool.
Isn't she so cool? She's so cool.
Holy shit. Holy shit. I'm going to read that book. Seriously. I'm going to read that book.
It goes into way more detail than I did. So you, the audience, what do you think of Josephine Baker? Do you have any questions, or did we leave out something awesome about her? Go to electricenthusiasm.com and tell us all about the things that we forgot to mention, because there's so much. I missed so much stuff in order to fit it into this podcast. I know I missed stuff. Tell me what I missed.
Alrighty. The rules of enthusiasm. You could call it the commandments of enthusiasm, or the enthusiandments.
No! That was terrible, and you should feel bad about that.
I'm proud of it, and I'm sticking with it. The enthusiandments. We don't want to limit your enthusiasm, but there are some good guidelines you can follow. And I think one of them is that any topic can be fascinating when shared with enthusiasm. I'll give you an example. I was once booked to give a talk at a Danish government agency that deals with maps and geographical data. I know, fascinating, right? And the speaker before me was due to give a half-hour talk on nautical maps of Greenland. And I was like, that sounds super boring. But hey, I'm there anyway. I might as well listen to what he has to say. And it was absolutely fascinating. He went into the history of nautical maps of Greenland. Greenland, obviously in the Arctic, a lot of icebergs, a lot of rocks, a lot of islands. The icebergs keep changing the landscape. He went into the early history of those maps and the first explorers who went there. He talked about how climate change is changing the oceans around Greenland and obviously the maps. He talks about the rise in cruise ship tourism and how they need accurate maps. So suddenly you don't have a, cruise ship with 5,000 people on board hitting an undiscovered rock outside of Greenland and sinking. That would be bad for tourism. Yeah. So because he knew his stuff and because he could talk about it with obvious enthusiasm, the topic of nautical maps of Greenland became absolutely fascinating. And I remember many of his points now, 7 or 8 years later. What about you, Katie? Have you ever had that experience where you got introduced to a topic that you did not expect to be fascinating, but it turned out to be?
I don't know if you've seen these videos on YouTube. They're from Wired, and they feature a dialect coach called Eric Singer.
No.
Oh, I will send them to you. You will love them. It's one of those things, again, like I had no interest in dialects or different accents or different sounds that your mouth can make. And then I saw his videos and I am deeply fascinated. My favorite snippet that I learned from him was about this idea of the R sound, that we make in an American accent versus a British accent. For example, the person who helps in a hospital who is not a doctor, they are a
nurse.
Excellent. You have a slight bunched R. You're saying it with an American accent, which means if you picture your tongue in your mouth as lying flat, the edges of your tongue are coming up. So imagine like your shoulders are shrugging. That's the edge of your tongue coming up. And it's called a bunched R, nurse. But if you have a British accent, your tongue moves in a completely different way, and it's called a tapped R, nus, where your tongue just taps the front of your mouth. Why do I know this? I will never forget this information. Where your tongue is in your mouth when you make an R sound in an American accent versus English accent is in my brain forever. Thank you, Eric Singer. I didn't know I needed that information, but I do, and I love it.
The problem is, of course, if you become too aware of what your tongue is doing, if it's shrugging or not. I can feel my tongue working in my mouth now. It's weird.
And if you're not careful, you're going to be conscious about your breathing soon. You have to think about how to breathe in and out.
Oh dear Lord. Oh dear Lord. Yeah.
Sorry,
No, that's
listeners.
bad.
But yes, I totally love that stuff.
Oh, that was a great example. And now I'm enthusiastic about it too, and I will check out those videos.
I'm sending you links.
I think we tend to think about some topics as interesting and some topics as boring. And I think that's a mistake because a fascinating topic presented in a boring way becomes boring. You won't become enthusiastic about it. I think that happens in school all the time.
Yes.
Whereas I think pretty much anything, I'm sure if somebody presented accounting to me with the right passion and the right knowledge, it would become absolutely fascinating. And I think we should challenge ourselves to one day have a guest on this show who can make us enthusiastic about accounting.
Oof, okay, that is a tall order, but I am here for it. Yes, it sounds like an excellent challenge.
Any topic can be fascinating when shared with enthusiasm. Part of the enthusiandments. I'm sticking with it. You can't stop me.
I really can't. I do think that is an amazing moment of meta guideline to enthusiasm. Like being open to the possibility of just getting excited about something. Even if you've never heard of it before, anything can be exciting if someone is talking about it with enthusiasm.
Dear listener, this is a brand new podcast, and if you're as enthusiastic about enthusiasm as we are, please consider spreading the word about it. That would make us so happy.
Super happy.
Super happy.
We hope you enjoyed sharing our enthusiasm in this episode. Please visit our website at electricenthusiasm.com or find us on Instagram at electricenthusiasm to discover more episodes or to tell us what you thought.
And now, take your cheetah for a walk.